course, that was a message from Harry Dunn's mother to the Foreign Secretary. We can now hear directly from Dominic Raab, who joins us from central London. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. So difficult listening to Charlotte Charles there and just seeing the impact that her son's death has had on her and her family. You're going to be meeting Mike Pompeo next week, the US Secretary of State. They're desperate for this to be your #1 priority when you meet him. Will it be?
Well, thank you, Sophie. And listening to Charlotte there, it's heartbreaking. I understand how agonising it's been. I understand how exhausted they are with this. We're on the family side. We've made that clear all along. There's a denial of justice here. There is an extradition request that's outstanding, and we have called on Anne Secoulis to return and to our American partners to facilitate that. We've done that consistently throughout. We've also done other things to try and ameliorate the situation. They won't give solace, they won't give Harry back to the family, and we know that, but they do want Anne Secoulis to return. I raised it with Mike Pompeo this week. Of course, we will discuss it when we see them. They've been adamant throughout that they will not return her, but we will. Our position remains the same. We're on the side of the family, and she should return. I can also just, I think it's worth saying, one of the things we wanted to make sure, and the undertaking that I made both to Parliament as well as to Charlotte and the rest of the family, is to make sure this could never happen again. And we have negotiated very carefully with the Americans to change the arrangements, the exchange of letters that will apply to the Croughton base and the way that Vienna Conventional Diplomatic Relations will apply. And we're very close to a conclusion on that. And I appreciate that's not the same thing as Anne Secoulis coming home. It won't bring Harry back, but it does allow us, if we can get that over the line, to be able to say that such a situation could never happen again. So we've been working very hard on all of those fronts, but ultimately, we can call on the US to do the right thing, and we hope that they will, but I think I'm also realistic, given the consistent position that they've taken, that they're not going to allow Anne Secoulis. She could, of course, of her own volition, say, I can feel the pain of that family, I will come home. We call on her to make that decision as well.
Because it sounds a little bit, listening to you, that you're effectively saying there's nothing more you can do specifically to bring Anne Secoulis home because the US have effectively ignored that extradition request. And just listening to Rad Seeger, that's exactly what he doesn't want to hear, because he says that what he wants to hear is a clear plan as to what you will do if the US continues to ignore the extradition request, which they have been doing so far. It sounds a little bit like you're not going to do anything.
No, it's not true at all. From what I've just said, Sophie, one of the things we want to do is make sure it could never happen again. In relation to
I'm talking specifically about Anne Secoulis. I'm talking specifically about Anne Secoulis and bringing her back to face justice in the UK.
Yes, but I'm also talking about the wider commitments that we've made in relation to this case, and I think it should be viewed in context. In relation to Anne Secoulis, of course, we've cleared the obstacles so that the law enforcement, the police and the Home Office can pursue charges, which is what they did. That's obviously an independent process, and there is an extradition request that is outstanding. We've consistently raised this with the US, but there's no measures that we could, I think, credibly, realistically take, which is somehow going to force the US or indeed Anne Secoulis to comply with this. But I want to be realistic because I don't want to raise expectations that are going to be dashed, but we have at every level raised this. I've raised it, we've raised it in Washington, the Prime Minister's raised it with President Trump, and we will continue to make clear we're on the side of the family here. We think that she should return, she must return home so that justice can be done. And we're doing all the other things that are within our gift, are within our control, to make sure that this terrible tragedy and the denial of justice that we've seen can't happen again.
OK, thank you for coming on and responding to those very powerful points the family made, although I'm not sure how optimistic they will be that Anne Secoulis is going to return to the United Kingdom. Lots more to cover with you, starting with Russia, because this week hackers who the UK believes were almost certainly part of Russian intelligence services targeted our COVID vaccine programmes. Do you believe any information was stolen?
Well, we've set out, and the UK's National Centre for Cybersecurity has set out the details of this. We're clear, and by the way, it's not just the UK, but we've worked with our US and Canadian counterparts to set this out. So we're absolutely confident that the Russian intelligence agencies were engaged in a cyber attack on research and development efforts and organisations in this country and internationally, with a view either to sabotage or to profit from the R&D that was taking place. And I think the point is, first of all, we've seen this as part of a wider systematic approach to cyber taken by Russia. And at the time that the world is coming together to try and tackle COVID-19, particularly come up with a global solution for a vaccine, I think it's outrageous and reprehensible that the Russian government is engaged in this activity. And so what we're doing with our allies is making sure people know, making sure the organisations know so that they can better defend against it, but also just calling Russia out. And we will do this now. You'll see us holding Russia to account and making sure that the world knows the nature of the reprehensible behaviour that they're engaged in, just as that actually, as a leading member of the international community, a permanent member of the Security Council, Russia should be engaged in that collaborative international effort.
Now, this has been denied by the Russian ambassador. He said, "I don't believe in this story at all. There is no sense in it." He's also denied claims this week that Russia interfered in the UK election. We do not interfere at all in elections, according to the Russian ambassador. Is he lying?
Well, first of all, there is a distinction between the cyber attack on the vaccine research, where we have attributed that to the Russian intelligence agencies along with the US and Canada. And what we've also made clear separately, and it is different, is that we're confident that there was Russian actors who were engaged in cyber efforts to disseminate, online efforts to disseminate and spread leaked and illegally obtained details from the US-UK free trade negotiations. But we haven't yet attributed that any more specifically, and that's because there is an ongoing criminal investigation underway. As for what the Russian ambassador said, look, of course he will come on and deny the attack on the research and development in relation to vaccines. Russia always does this when it's behaved in such an egregious way. They denied responsibility for the Salisbury attack in 2018, and we are calling them out. And it's important, as with Salisbury, as with their cyber attacks and the other nefarious behaviour Russia engages in, we are going to hold them to account and call them out. But look, I'm not surprised in the least that the Russian ambassadors wheeled out to deny it.
Okay, another major issue, of course, is our relationship with China. The government, of course, has taken the decision to change its decision on allowing Huawei access to the UK's 5G network. There are also huge concerns over China's actions in Hong Kong, over its actions and treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, over its transparency on coronavirus. On this show last Sunday, Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, called for a reset of the whole of our relationship with China. Do we need to have a reset with our relationship with China?
Well, I think we need to be very careful in our dealings. Look, on the one hand, we want a positive relationship with China. There are all sorts of areas and scope for cooperation, not just on investment and trade and things like that, but also on climate change, which is going to be really important. If we're going to shift the dial on climate change, we need to be able to work with China. Equally, with various efforts, and again, cyber attacks, the resilience of our vital interests like 5G, and when it comes to standing up for our values, as we've done very clearly on Hong Kong with our offer to those eligible for BNO status, we will always make clear our position on those key interests and on our key values to China. And that's the calibrated approach that we'll take. We've said there won't be business as usual after the COVID-19, and we're working with our international partners to get a proper independent review of what happened. But we also want to make sure we're not slipping into some outdated, dogmatic approach with China. We're going to follow the UK national interest, and we're going to work with our partners, try and work with China on the things where we can really accentuate the positive, but be very clear-sighted and clear-eyed about the risks we're going to protect our vital interests. And on Hong Kong, I'm going to go to the House of Commons tomorrow to make a further statement on the work we've been doing with our partners in government, and I'll say more about our response then. But we're clear-eyed about the relationship.
On Hong Kong specifically, some of your Conservative colleagues have written a letter saying that they want you to suspend the extradition treaty with the country because of what's been happening, of course, with China. Are you going to do that?
Well, as I said, on the 1st of July, when I set out in the House of Commons the offer we're making to B&O status, Hong Kong residents with B&O status, which is the status dating back to the handover, we've made that offer. We're working with our international partners to see what other offers they will make to the people of Hong Kong. And I also said that we would review a whole range of other considerations. One of the things that we've reviewed is our extradition arrangements, and I will be updating the House on the conclusion of that review along with other things that we've been looking at tomorrow. And I think it's right for me to do that tomorrow in the House of Commons in the proper way.
OK, it sounds a bit like we've got more to hear from that very shortly in that case. Now, I just want to talk to you a bit about coronavirus. At the beginning of the programme, we heard from the head of the Office of National Statistics, who was speaking about those concerns about the way Public Health England had been collecting data on the number of people who've died of COVID-19 in England, from saying that, for example, people who've recovered are still being marked as dying of COVID-19. And the Health Secretary, of course, has ordered this review. What I don't understand on this is that you and other ministers for months were standing in front of the platform in Downing Street giving us those numbers. Did you have no idea how they were calculated? Because it feels like a pretty dramatic oversight.
No, I think we've talked, and I think you've heard other people, the scientists, talking about the challenge with, for example, not so specifically in relation to deaths, but in relation to diagnosis, that there is some under and some over-reporting in terms of cases in the community. And one of the points, and I think Serene Diamond, who you mentioned, also made this clear, is that actually, whilst we do need to get those accurate aggregate numbers, you can still rely on the data that we've been publishing in relation to the trend. So if you take mid-April to now we're mid-July, on the data, we've seen the number of daily deaths, the average number of daily deaths, go from over 1,000 a day, heartbreaking just to think about that, to fewer than 100 a day on the average weekly aggregate or rolling data for the daily deaths. If you look at the number of people in hospital with COVID-19, we've gone from over 20,000 to fewer than 200. And I do think we can...
I understand the movement in the figures and the importance to look at the trends, but it just feels like the government was caught unaware by these issues and the way that the deaths were calculated. Did you not know how Public Health England were calculating the figures?
There's always been, as I said, there's always been issues and methodological questions that we've been constantly trying to streamline and correct if there were issues with them.
But this was how they calculated them or not?
This is clearly something new that's arisen, and as a result of that, of course, the Health Secretary said we need an urgent review so that we've got that aggregate.
Shouldn't you have asked, though? This is, like, you were the ones reading them out. You have to take ownership of them. I mean, shouldn't you have been trying to find out how they were calculated?
Oh, yes, we did, and we asked those questions, and there's a considerable amount of time and effort on the rigour of the data we were getting, and of course, as Serene Diamond has said, we've also had the ONS data. So we've asked those questions, and as they come to light, and when they come to light, and other countries are going through similar challenges with the methodology, and there are differences in the way that they can be counted in the hospital to the way they're counted in the community, and for example, on the death certificate, or indeed even if it's done by GPs, where there has been some concern in relation to cases, let alone deaths, that there may be in some areas over counting, in other areas under counting. So those issues, those methodological questions, we've constantly been trying to make sure they're as accurate as possible throughout this process. And as this has come to light, the Health Secretary, I think quite rightly, has ordered an urgent review. So we've got the aggregate view. We have also, in fairness, Sophie, said from the outset that we would only have a really reliable, dependable sense of the big picture in terms of the total number of deaths.
Okay.
We had the all-cause mortality, which we will only get at the end of the crisis, and that would also, in terms of comparisons with other countries, be what you'd need to rely on.
Understood. And a couple of things just to finish, because we are running out of time, Mr. Raab. Now, in an interview with the Sunday Telegraph today, the Prime Minister says another national lockdown was like a nuclear deterrent. He never wants to use it. But Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Advisor, has struck a slightly different note, saying come winter, the challenges will be very much greater, and there is a risk that this could also need national measures as well. It feels a little bit like the government and the scientific advisors are out of step about whether a national lockdown should be necessary.
Well, no, I don't think that's right, Sophie, but national measures and national lockdown aren't the same thing. But we take Sir Patrick Vallance, one of our finest public servants, advice very carefully and seriously, and we look at it right the way across the board. And ultimately, politicians, Prime Minister, myself and others, take responsibility. But the key thing is that the Prime Minister has been emphasising is the ability to take locally targeted measures, and we've got new powers for local authorities that are going to be put in place this week, will enable us to take targeted action to avoid a national lockdown. And indeed, that is what is allowing us having that power, whether it's on the testing and the tracing, but also the targeted local measures that we can take and local authorities can take, also allows us to move forward and ease restrictions as we've been doing consistently, but only when the conditions are right, when we know we've made the progress that I just described in getting the prevalence of this disease down, but also when we've got the infrastructure, the NHS infrastructure, the ventilator beds, the testing and the tracing in the kind of shape which means that we can be confident in getting life back to something akin to normal.
OK, talking about getting life back to normal, just very finally, Sir Ian Diamond also said that there hadn't been an uptick in infections that the ONS has noticed since the lockdown had started to be eased. And the Prime Minister said on Friday that we hope by November at the earliest we can continue to make progress. It may conceivably be possible to move away from social distancing measures from the 1 metre rule. So does this mean that if infections continue to fall, social distancing could be over by November?
Well, if you look at the document that we published this week about the next phase of rebuilding, we set out some targets and some measures that we're taking on the 1st of August. Then schools will come back in September. And then towards October and November, there are other areas where we would like to see if we can make steps to getting back something akin to normal. But I must stress about this. We've also said, and the Prime Minister has been very clear on this, that it's all conditional on us continuing to make progress with the data in the way I described, the number of people in hospital, the number of cases, the number of deaths, making sure that we've got the infrastructure in the NHS to be able to cope, particularly as we approach winter. So there's another £3 billion of investment going into the NHS to make sure that we can, in the round, be able to cope with any of the pressures that we might have, both COVID and non-COVID-19 health pressures. So, and I think it is right, though, to give businesses in the country that sense of a target and a sense of hope. There'll be some businesses that will not be able to go back to normal until right at the end, those final measures that we take. And I do think as they consider whether they just got to lay people off or whether they're going to go into administration, they'll have taken on debt, they'll have had the support from the government. I do think it is right that in the very conditioned way and careful way we give those businesses and their employees the hope that actually we can come through this. So we're doing it very carefully. As we've said all along, the conditions are there, we're monitoring it very carefully, but we do hope to be able to get back closer to normal, and we'll take the careful steps, the sure-footed steps, on the roadmap towards that eventual destination.
OK, Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary, thank you for being on the programme.